Great. Thank you so much, Terrence, and thank all of you for being part of this webinar this afternoon. We are very excited that you can join us today, but also that we can all dive into some new research findings about parent mindsets in Massachusetts around their child's education. Before we get started, I'd like to thank the One8 Foundation and the Barr Foundation for supporting this research, and also our partners, the Massachusetts PTA, Hyde Square Task Force, Massachusetts Parents United, Boston School Finder, Urban League of Springfield, Ed Navigator, and Phenomenal Moms. These organizations were with us from the beginning, and they've really helped us hone in on issues that are most important for Massachusetts families. They've been a huge help to us and throughout this research project. I'd also like to introduce colleagues who are on the line as well, and will join in this webinar. From our research partner, Edge Research, we have Adam Burns and Karen Emerson. We've got Vanessa Lipschitz from the One8 Foundation and Jocelyn Pickford from Learning Heroes. And before we get started, I just wanted to set a little bit of context for why we did this research. And hopefully this slide will change. There we go. Oops, went too far. Here we go. So I wanted to give you just a little bit of context about, why we launched this project in Massachusetts. Learning Heroes, some of you may be familiar with this and some may not be, but we've done research for 3 years in a row with parents and guardians that has found that 9 in 10 K through 8 parents reported that their child is at or above grade level in reading and math. And I don't have to tell you this, that the percentage of K through 8 students achieving at grade level is really much lower. It's about 37% nationally. So parents and guardians often have an inaccurate picture of their child's achievement. And we believe that this hinders their ability to support their child's learning and growth. We also believe that with an accurate picture, parents can exert more pressure on the system for schools to improve and a better education for students throughout the Commonwealth. So as we launched this project, we wanted to start with a shared understanding. And we wanted to bring together key Massachusetts stakeholders, either online like we're doing today or in person. And so that's been a critical piece of this effort, both in terms of the initial partners that we brought together from the beginning, as well as the dissemination work that we're going to be doing, hopefully with a lot of you. So some of you, as I mentioned before, may not be familiar with Learning Heroes, and I'm not going to spend very much time on this because I know everybody wants to dive into the data. But a lot of times I get the question, so what is Learning Heroes? What do you do? And Learning Heroes is a national nonprofit that has been around for about 4 years with a vision of supporting parents as they help their kids succeed in school. And our mission is to inspire and equip parents to be effective advocates. And so we made an important decision early on, right when we started, that in order for us to communicate most effectively with parents and guardians, and by the way, when I say parents, I'm talking about parents, guardians, grandparents, aunts and uncles, the caring adults in a child's life. So we made an important decision that everything that we do is going to be steeped in research. After all, how could we possibly communicate with parents if we first didn't listen to parents and understand kind of their hopes and fears and dreams and kind of what they're concerned about in terms of their child's education? So that's really a critical component of our work. So as you see here in this slide, we've done research in about 25 states nationwide. We've done 100 focus groups, more than 100. We've done dozens of in-depth interviews, qualitative surveys. We've done ethnography, where we're actually going into the parents' homes and getting information kind of based on their routines. We've done dozens of tests of our tools, and also our focus in all of our research is on low-income parents and guardians and parents of color. In terms of our strategic objectives, they're really closely tied to our research. So it's helping parents gain that accurate picture of how their children are doing academically and developmentally. It's helping parents understand what it means for their children to be prepared for success in and out of school. And finally, and very importantly, so that parents will know what actions that they can take to support their children's academic and developmental success. And we work with lots of partners. This is a slide that I'm really proud of because we work with SEAs and LEAs and civil rights organizations and parent organizations, just a number of different organizations that we work very closely with on a day-to-day basis. And as I mentioned before, on this project specifically, we're working with several partners in Massachusetts, including, like I mentioned, the Massachusetts PTA, Hyde Square Task Force, Massachusetts Parents United, Urban League of Springfield, Boston School Finder, Phenomenal Moms, and Ed Navigator. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Adam Burns, who's going to walk us through the research.
Great. I too am excited to jump into the research. My colleague Karen and I, we really enjoyed this project, not just because of the subject matter, but also because it was a wonderful collaboration, and we appreciate all the input and insight from such engaged and thoughtful partners, and it really resulted in some exciting findings. And before we get into those findings, just want to spend a brief moment on methodology to bring everyone up to speed on the rigor used for this study. It was an online survey of parents of K-8 children in Massachusetts, but we also conducted a phone survey that included completes from both landline and cell phones to increase the possibility for people to participate in this survey. We had a total statewide sample of 564 parents, and you notice the breakdown of parents who participated in this survey. It's important for us to emphasize that we did set quotas so that all the data are representative by key demographics, including geography, race, and ethnicity. But we also did something that we call including oversamples. And basically what that means is that there are other audiences in which we want to make sure we have enough respondents so that we can look at the results with some statistical validity. We want to increase the number of completed interviews we get among those audiences specifically. So we did conduct those oversamples among African American parents, Hispanic parents, as well as parents who live in Suffolk County, so we could look at differences within and across those groups in addition to what we noticed in the survey overall. One final quick point as we go through, as we jump into the data, you'll notice that some numbers in the report are going to be either green or red. Those represent statistically significant differences, green higher, red lower, across specific audiences within the Massachusetts survey. Where you see green and red arrows, however, is where you'll notice some statistically significant differences from Massachusetts compared to a national study that Learning Heroes conducted in 2017. So we're not only going to be able to just see what's going on in Massachusetts, but how it compares to relatively recent data among parents nationwide. So before we get into the specifics, let's talk about the key insights. What are the elements that really jump out from this study? And it starts with the notion that Massachusetts parents are truly highly engaged when it comes to their children's education. They absolutely prioritize academics, but it's not necessarily a concern. So again, a priority, but not something that's necessarily keeping them up at night. In addition, Massachusetts parents also tend to have a bit more of a realistic view of how well their children are doing. David mentioned the disconnect, and that disconnect remains, and it exists among Massachusetts parents, but it's not as huge as it is nationwide. So that's an important distinction when we think about Massachusetts parents. So when we factor in that initial level of engagement, the fact that academics is a priority, and more of a realistic view of achievement, that tells us and shows us that really the landscape is ripe to have Massachusetts parents get that more accurate picture of their child's academic achievement. That's really the end goal that David mentioned, and also one that we do see as possible, as the data will illustrate. So we're going to start by setting the stage, and what do Massachusetts parents bring to the table when it comes to education before we even start to talk about achievement. So we'll begin by looking at responses to one question, which is, who has the greatest responsibility for a child's success in school? You'll notice data from Massachusetts are in the blue bars. Data from the National Parents Survey is in the orange bars. And we noticed a couple of really interesting differences here right off the bat. Nationwide, it's pretty much an even split between the parent and guardian and the child. About just over 40% of both nationwide are saying that's where the responsibility lies. In Massachusetts, however, 50% half say it's parents. Now, there's a little bit of difference here between middle school parents and elementary school parents, but still, overwhelmingly, parents in Massachusetts put the responsibility of their children's education squarely on their own shoulders. Now, when you ask parents about college and how important it is to them for their child to go to college and receive a 2- or a 4-year college degree, both Massachusetts parents and parents nationwide feel that it is either absolutely essential or very important. But you see that in Massachusetts, we have 78% of parents who are responding in this way. It's absolutely essential or very important. And these results are very consistent across race, ethnicity, and other subgroups that we looked at in this survey. And not only is college essential to these parents, but Massachusetts parents and parents nationwide are pretty confident that their child is well prepared for entrance into and success in college upon graduation from high school. We have 6 in 10 are in Massachusetts, more than that, 64%, saying that they're extremely or very confident in this level of preparation for their child. And we do see some interesting differences across subgroups here. A little bit more confidence among Bostonians and among African American parents. We also see confidence a bit higher in elementary school parents compared to parents of middle school students. But again, among both, still majority feeling that they're at least very confident that their child will succeed, and parents in higher income households are more likely to be very or extremely confident. So we have this confidence. This also translates into the likelihood these parents think that their child will graduate from college and receive this 2- or 4-year degree. And again, we see very high numbers, 80% of Massachusetts parents saying that it's extremely or very likely that this will happen for their children, and some slight subgroup differences here, not so much among race and ethnicity, but we see that over half of parents in Boston say that it's extremely likely that their child will graduate with a degree. So we have this confidence. So let's flip the page or flip the script a little bit. What are the things that parents are worried about? And when we look at parents nationwide as well as parents in Massachusetts, what rises to the top is that concern about how they'll pay for college. So if we look at the graph, we see the darker shading as the stronger intensity, the percentage who worry a lot, which is the top response in this 5-point scale. When you get to the lighter shading, that's the next response for worry some. We add those together and call that top 2 box, and that tells us that we have 72% of Massachusetts parents saying that they worry some or a lot about being able to pay for college education, and we see 57% of parents nationwide feeling similarly. Second on the list among parents overall and in Massachusetts is their child's happiness and emotional well-being, and in Massachusetts it still hovers around this 70%. It's just under that at 69%, worrying some or worrying a lot about this happiness and well-being. One other piece that's really interesting here is that the level of worry among Massachusetts parents is higher than that of parents nationwide on 4 of the 5 items you see on this slide. That could be because parents are a bit more worried in Massachusetts than parents nationwide, but it could also be because of the time when these surveys were given. It could be that there's more worry in the nation now than when we conducted the study in 2017, but it's very easy to see that worry is a big deal here for parents in Massachusetts. There are some interesting subgroup differences as well. Hispanic parents are reporting a bit more worry on several of these items than other parents in Massachusetts. Their top 3 being paying for college education, their child being bullied, and their child's happiness and emotional well-being. Among African American parents, we see 2 of those rising to the top, but they also note physical safety as something that they are worried a lot about. So very interesting to see what rises to the top. And this is what we call the top tier, because these weren't the only answer categories that were included in this question. What you may notice that's missing, or wondering what's missing from this list of worries, is academics. And that's because academics really fall to the second tier in worry among parents nationwide, as well as parents in Massachusetts. In fact, when we look at parents in Massachusetts, there's only one real academic concern that receives over half of parents saying they're worried a lot or worried some about, and that's their child gaining the knowledge and skills needed for college, and that's at 55%. But there's less than 50% of Massachusetts parents worrying a lot or some about whether or not their child's on track, whether they're worried about their child's report card grades, or their child's annual state test results, which resides at the overall bottom of the list. There are also some interesting differences here among subgroups. We see that, again, Hispanics continue to be a bit more worried than other parents about all of these issues, but still lower than the top tier. But we do also see some worry about a child being less connected to their family's cultural heritage. We see some statistically significant differences there among Hispanic parents as well as African American parents. So all of these are important mindset elements to keep in mind, and let's make sure that we keep this backdrop in mind as Karen starts to walk us through this idea of achievement and parent perceptions of achievement.
Gotcha. So the next thing, as Adam said, is we're going to talk a little bit about what parents actually think is happening with their kids, and how that plays into, this idea of a disconnect. So what you can see on the screen right now is that, parents are pretty confident about college and their kids graduating from college because they actually believe that their children are performing at or above grade level. So when we're looking at the data above, you can see in the blue box in each graph is the at or above percentage. And so in Massachusetts, 88% of parents believe their child is performing at or above grade level in math, 88% at or above in reading, pretty comparable to the national numbers. However, parents in Massachusetts are actually more likely to say at grade level than parents nationally. So they hold maybe a less inflated or possibly more realistic view of their child's achievement compared to parents overall. However, in the gray boxes, you noticed the reality. So in reality, 52% of Massachusetts students are below grade level in math, not 11%, and 49% are below grade level in reading. So while these parents in Massachusetts may have a slightly less inflated view of their child's achievement, it's not necessarily more accurate, and it's definitely not completely accurate. So as we saw, parents tend to think their child is at or above grade level, but we know that grade level is not necessarily something that parents fully have their head around or maybe have an accurate assessment of. It's a bit of a mystery to them. So we wanted to also ask this question in a way that's a little bit more kind of layman's terms. Interestingly, Massachusetts parents are more likely than parents nationally to say their children are average. Otherwise, the numbers are pretty comparable. But again, we see this evidence of less inflated sense of their child's achievement here than nationally, which means parents are actually starting out a little bit closer to where we want them to be, even if they are still off the mark, as we saw on the previous slide. Interestingly, as we can see on the right side of the screen, more than half of Massachusetts parents do say that their child has struggled academically at some point, and that is significantly higher than the same number among parents nationally, where less than 4 in 10 say they have seen their children struggle. So when it comes to detecting a struggle, what does that actually look like? They rely on home indicators more than anything else. So things like seeing a child having difficulty with homework, seeing a child's mood. Things like teacher communications or a low grade are actually second tier compared to their own observations as parents. And this really echoes what we heard in qualitative research that informed this survey. Parents consistently led with their child's demeanor or mood as a way to know how they were doing at school. So if they're looking at mood, what else are they looking at to understand how their child is really doing academically? So we asked a question about the accuracy of different indicators that parents might be able to look at to tell what their child is really up to at school. And interestingly, teacher feedback and report card grades are considered accurate by the vast majority of parents. Those are the things that they look at and think are true indicators of how their child is really doing. What's not necessarily considered accurate, you can see at the bottom, is state test scores. Barely half of parents in Massachusetts consider state test scores an accurate indicator of their child's academic achievement. African American and Hispanic parents are much more likely to actually trust the accuracy of state tests, but they still fall well below those other indicators of report cards and teacher feedback. So a little more trust in those tests among a couple audiences, but still the bottom tier. We also asked how much parents rely on different indicators of a broader list. So report cards and parent-teacher communications still rank up at the top. Those are what parents rely on most to determine academic achievement. And pause for a second here on the top three things on this list. Informal communication with teachers, parent-teacher conferences, and report card grades. All of those elements are teacher-generated. So teachers are a really important element to this puzzle of why parents have a disconnect between the reality and their perception of how their children are doing. They're looking at these things that teachers are providing or saying or putting together, but somehow there's still a mismatch between perception and reality. African American parents are more likely to rely on communication from teachers, conferences, classroom assessments, state test scores than other parents in Massachusetts. And Hispanic parents resemble parents statewide a little bit more with the exception of the state test scores. So again, we do see a little bit more trust of those state test scores among parents of color, but still near the bottom when it comes to what they're relying on to assess their own child. So the fact that report cards are at the top of the list of things that parents rely on and consider accurate can be problematic, and is especially problematic in Massachusetts compared to the national data. So what we see here in this graph is that parents in Massachusetts are more likely to report a mismatch or a disconnect between grades and more objective measures like state test scores than parents nationally. So this means that more parents see their child receiving better marks on report cards than the state tests, and most choose to believe the report card grades based on the answers that we just looked at and how much they're relying on report cards more than state tests. So 44% of Massachusetts parents see that kind of discrepancy compared to just about a quarter of parents nationally. Most parents nationally say that their students' test scores and grades are about the same, that they're telling the same story. One thing to note, though, as Adam mentioned at the top of the conversation, parents in Massachusetts are pretty engaged, and we do have data that suggests that, more Massachusetts parents are reporting that they even look at the state test scores. So some of what might be happening here is that more parents are reporting a mismatch because they've actually looked at the two things and noticed that they're different. That's a step in the right direction, but we do also know that they're still believing report cards over state tests. So it's good that they're looking, but they're still not necessarily putting all the pieces together and drawing the right conclusions from this mismatch. So the good news is that more parents in Massachusetts are likely to question their feelings about their child's level of achievement when given information about the actual number of students in the state that are below grade level in math and reading. So a little information can kind of challenge that confidence and challenge what they think they know. Half believe their child might be below grade level once they hear that information. So you can see in the blue text off to the right, this is what we told them, that the recent test scores show that by 8th grade, more than half of Massachusetts students are below grade level in math and 49% below in reading. Overall, more than a third of parents who said their child was at or above grade level in both subjects at the start of the survey, when they read that information, now say it's at least somewhat likely that they're below in at least one of those subjects. So we can definitely see a shift in confidence. We also can see on the left side that we ask how likely is it that your child is below grade level given this information, and we see a shift. More parents in Massachusetts are saying now, it's half of parents actually in Massachusetts now are saying it's very somewhat likely that my child is one of those that's in that below grade level bucket. So again, parents are pretty engaged. Parents are very responsive to information in Massachusetts, and that's a really encouraging sign. So now we're going to talk a little bit about parent actions, because the other piece of good news here is that Massachusetts parents are also different from parents nationally in what they actually do when it comes to engaging in their children's education, and that's something that we can definitely work with. So both Massachusetts parents and parents nationally believe they can make a difference in their child's education. In that way, Massachusetts are pretty comparable. There's that sense of efficacy, of power to have an impact on their child's education. But where the difference comes in is really on action. So we have a list here of things that we asked parents if they had done these actions in the last school year. So at the time of the survey, that we were referring to the 2017-2018 school year. The numbers in yellow are national, and you can see we actually expanded the list for Massachusetts. But Massachusetts parents are more likely to help their children with homework, attended a parent-teacher conference, and communicated with their child's teacher outside of such a conference than parents nationally. So they're significantly more likely to engage in these key activities that demonstrate their interest and their engagement in their child's education. We also asked about these other activities that we didn't look at nationally, so back to school nights, reviewing information about their child's school performance, talking to a principal of their child's school, and assessing or accessing their child's grades online. So again, you can see majorities on most of these items. The only two items below are talking to a guidance counselor or attending a PTA meeting, but across the board, majorities of parents in Massachusetts are reporting each of these activities. What's really interesting, though, and presents an opportunity in Massachusetts is that half of Massachusetts parents report they are less involved than they would ideally like to be or think they should be in their parents' education, or their child's education, pardon me. So what you can see in the graphs here, in the two blue bars, the top blue bar is the ideal. We asked parents, how much would you ideally like to be involved in your child's education using a scale from 1 to 10? A 1 means you would not like to be involved at all, as in never help with homework and never communicate with teachers or school. And a 10 means you would like to be extremely involved, as in regularly helping with homework and regularly communicating with teachers or the school. So you can see from the ideal, more than a third of parents say a level 10 is their ideal form of involvement. They want to be very involved. When in actuality, the next bar down, you can see what their real level of involvement is. Only 25% of parents say that they're at that level 10. And the graph on the right shows what percent actually reported a lower number for their actual than their ideal. And that's where we see, half of parents in Massachusetts think they're not living up to their own aspirations for engagement. Because of that, there is some opportunity to provide some direction to parents. So the vast majority of parents say they're very or extremely likely to participate in a regular task if a teacher asks. So this was framed as a task that would take 15 to 20 minutes per day, and that a teacher would be specifically asking them to do something. So when provided with direction, most parents are very eager to engage in more activities around their child's education if they know that it's something the teacher says is valuable or helpful. But we also know that their confidence is not absolute. As much as they're willing to engage and to take direction on where they could maybe be doing more, they're not necessarily confident in helping their child with homework, especially when it comes to math. This was a recurring theme in the qualitative as well, and probably is not a surprise given all the discussion over the years about the new math curriculum or new ways of doing math. So more guidance in a lot of areas would probably raise parents' confidence and may explain why some aren't engaging as much now. And when it comes to looking for support and looking for guidance in terms of what can be done to help their children, it's important to make sure that we're thinking not just about the teachers that are, obviously on the front lines and maybe a first resource for parents. They're also reaching out to others to help them figure these things out as well. So guidance counselors, more than half of parents would reach out to a guidance counselor. About half would reach out to another family member who might have some advice on the issue they're facing. But others include, the principal or organizations outside of school that provide support for children, or a faith leader. The interesting thing to note, and the important thing to note, is that when we're looking at parents of color and parents in Suffolk County or the Boston area, significantly more likely to be turning to those other organizations that are not necessarily school affiliated, but also provide support for children outside of school, as well as more likely to turn to faith leaders for guidance in this area. So a lot of places that parents are turning to for this guidance, and they're willing to take guidance when it's offered. So finally, we asked parents how helpful would each of several different resources be. And the first thing I want to point out on this slide is you notice that all the blue bars, which are the Massachusetts numbers, are much longer than the yellow bars. We could have a green up arrow on every single number on this graph. We chose not to do that because that would just get a little messy, but we do have a note below the table that all these items are significantly higher in Massachusetts. Massachusetts parents are significantly more likely to say that these things would be helpful. Again, they are so eager for resources, eager for guidance, and it's really encouraging. So over 80%, like I said that they would take a task that a teacher asks them to do and do it on a regular basis. And that's really a big invitation to look at this list of potential interventions and take some action. So a majority of parents in Massachusetts find each of these items helpful, but the top testing ones are activities that help their child improve, detailed explanations of grade level expectations. Again, it's something that's a little bit of a mystery to parents, and guidance on how they can actually effectively help with their child's homework. One last thing we're going to touch on before we kick it over to Vanessa. As Adam mentioned at the top, we did have an oversample in Suffolk County, supported by the Barr Foundation. This data has been, as you saw, peppered throughout the presentation and on each slide, and significant differences highlighted. So this is here as a quick reference for those who are especially interested in this area. Just a couple key differences to point out that we found when it comes to the Boston area. Parents are actually more likely to be worried about or relying on state test results than elsewhere. It's still pretty low on the list of reliable indicators or things they find accurate, but a little more buy-in to state tests in Suffolk County. More parents say they're at least as involved as they would like to be with their child's education and statewide. So parents in Suffolk County more likely to say that they're meeting their parental aspirations when it comes to educational involvement. And there's more barriers though as well. So more report barriers around language or not feeling welcomed by the teacher in Suffolk County compared to those numbers statewide. So there's some things that are making Suffolk County parents not feel welcome when they try to engage in their child's education, which should be kind of kept in mind in this region especially. That's the data. So with that, we're going to kick it over to Vanessa from One8 to talk about their efforts on mini grants.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Karen. And I'm not sure that I have the ability to advance the slides, so I might just give you all a verbal cue. But as Karen and the rest of the Edge team and Learning Heroes team mentioned, the One8 Foundation is a Boston-based foundation. We fund across Massachusetts, and we're really excited about this research that we've funded in the earlier part of this year. Our goal at the foundation is really to think about how we can use this data as a means to spark the right conversation to understand what part parents can play in the continuous improvement of our education system in Massachusetts for students and families. And so to that end, what we've done is try to structure a set of grant opportunities that makes that next tranche of work, the work of converting research to action, a little bit easier for folks. And so the first type of grant opportunity that we've launched are what we're calling dissemination grants. But basically, these are grants that are really designed to support local groups who want to have the opportunity to talk about this research with their communities. They're grants of about $2,000, and the intention is that folks will use that funding to offset the costs of convening a group of local stakeholders. What that actually means and what we're sort of asking in those grants is that those convenings accomplish two things. The first is that you have a chance to talk with folks about what of this data really resonates with them. We as sort of a foundation can sit and look at this data all day long, but it really, at the end of the day, is a question of what parents and local communities see in the data that's worth responding to. And so the first ask sort of these convenings is that you report back to us sort of what was most interesting about this to local communities so that we can continue to think about how to better support parents as they partner with schools. The second ask within the context of these dissemination grants is that folks spend part of the convening time coming up with 2 to 3 leading ideas that seem actionable. And here the goal is ideally to get to a set of ideas that could be piloted with support from the foundation in the 2019-2020 school year. And so again, we will never get to the right set of solutions if those ideas come from the foundation. We are really asking those who are doing the work with communities and with parents every day to help be a part of this solutioning work and to look at this data, figure out what resonates, and figure out what makes the most sense in terms of responding to it. So those are the dissemination grants. We are asking that folks in the grant application present a plan that is designed to reach 100 people. That can be through a couple of different convenings. It can be in person, it could be online, and so we're really open to that, but that is what we've sort of set as an aspirational benchmark for each group applying for a grant. The second type of grant that we've opened up are what we're calling collaboration grants. And the notion here is that to move some of the larger issues presented in this research will take organizations working together. And we are open to what that means. It might be different groups that serve different communities. It might be different groups that serve parents working together across the state. It might be groups that serve parents and groups that serve teachers. But the notion is that some of this work will require broader stakeholder sets, and so there is some inherent value in collaboration. We also know that it takes time and resources to do collaboration work, and that's why these grants can go up to $20,000, and with the goal of supporting a comprehensive 3-month planning process to really outline the idea of the collaboration and again lay a plan to pilot the collaboration or roll out the collaboration in the 2019-2020 school year. The final thing I'll say about these grants is you'll see in the description that they're written in a very, very sort of comprehensive way. So it could be about a set of shared services, it could be about a new intervention, it could be about some set of campaign. Again, we don't want the ideas or sort of strict guardrails on what the nature of the collaboration is to come from the foundation, but the notion is if we can get groups who look at this and think, we see in this the same set of problems and a same promising set of solutions to be working together, we have the opportunity to move the ball further faster. So that at a high level, sort of the nature of the 2 grant opportunities that are currently open from the One8 Foundation. And if we can click forward one slide, here are some of the logistics. So for both opportunities, we are going to do 2 rounds of funding. And that's only because as we've sort of roll out and talk to more folks about this research, we don't want folks to be excluded from either application as a function of timing. But the first round application deadline is December 14th, with the notion that we would announce grantees early in the new year for work to really occur in the January through April timeframe, and then grantees to come back and convene in May so that folks can share out the results of their work and we can get some cross-pollination of ideas. And again, that has been timed around this notion of could we get to a set of pilot ideas that One8 could consider funding for the 2019-2020 school year. There will be a second round with a deadline in April, and again, you can see that timeline on the right, and that's rolled out to ideally support pilots in the second semester of that 19-20 school year. The one piece of information that's not on the slide is that both of these applications are currently open. So if you go to One8's website, which is one8, the number 8, one8.org, you will see in the top bar a tab for grant applications, and under that, dissemination and collaboration mini grants listed. And so folks who are interested should go in, and there are links to both grant applications. I will also say for those of you who hear grant applications and start to think, oh my goodness, when am I going to do that? The goal here is for these applications to be really simple. Both are under 10 questions. Again, our goal is for as many people as who have interest to see this work and have the opportunity to respond to it and to think about potential responses that are appropriate within the context of their local communities. And so we've been very, very intentional about trying to have a very, very sort of low barrier to entry on the grant application. And I think that is it for me. So I will turn it back for questions.
Excellent.
Excellent. This is Jocelyn Pickford. Thank you all. Thanks to our presenters and for all of you who are on the webinar. So now you have had a chance to hear about the data, to hear about this mini grant opportunity. And at this point, we want to turn it open to questions. We have had one come in writing so far, so we'll start there. But if others of you on the line have questions, please feel free to enter them into the question box. And then I believe we can also open up and unmute and people can just ask directly. So this question is actually for our EDGE research friends. The question is around methodology. What was the sampling strategy for the survey? Is it a random sample? And what was the response rate?
Okay, great. So we'll respond to these different parts, keeping in mind that we collected data across two different formats, both online and via telephone through non-probability sampling using reputable sample providers in order to identify potential respondents to the survey. Our completion rate, which is what's typically used when you talk about online survey data collection, was around 14%. And then our response rate on the phones, which is also seems to be a very traditional response rate these days for telephone completion, was in the low single digits. But again, used both means of data collection, and then with the phone piece, including potential respondents from landline as well as cell phone to maximize the likelihood of participation from as many Massachusetts parents as possible.
Excellent. Thank you, Adam. At this point, are we able to unmute the participants? And if there's anyone on the line who would just like to directly ask a question, the question, again, could be about the research, could be about your reactions to the research, anything you'd like to probe further, or even just observations. Or certainly we do have Vanessa here, so if anyone has questions about the grant opportunities.
Yes, if you all feel more comfortable just asking your question verbally, you can raise your hand and I'll unmute you.
So we will give everyone just a moment to decide if you all have questions.
Looks like there's a question in the chat box, Jocelyn. Shoot now.
I'm not seeing it, Terrence. Could you read it?
Sure thing, yes, 1 second. This one comes from Carla. She asks if we can review again the theory of action behind this research.
Yeah, I think, and I'll start there, and anyone else feel free to jump in. But I think that the theory of action behind the research is, if we can give parents a more accurate picture of their child's academic development, then they will be better able to support their children academically. So that really is something that we have heard again and again for the past 3 years in our research. And so that's really what the impetus behind this piece of research in Massachusetts.
And I can weigh in from the foundation perspective too, which I think foots very squarely with the Learning Heroes perspective. I think One8 has been very focused on this parent research, but also is in the early stages of doing some research on the teacher side too. And one of the questions we are very focused on is, what is the potential for stronger family-school collaboration as a mechanism to drive student academic achievement? And the theory is, for that to happen in any sort of intentional way, you need to start from a place where there is a set of shared and accurate information. You then need to move from there to a place where you're saying, what can we do to improve the flow of information and to fully leverage the ability of parents to be partners in the work of our schools in Massachusetts? And I think what was interesting for us and why it makes sense to start with this research is, I think it clarifies for us that where we are currently in Massachusetts is in a place where The information systems between schools and families are not particularly strong. And so we are in a moment where we're seeing some level of pure information gap that inherently constrains the extent to which parents can support students and teachers in the work to improve academic achievement. So understanding that disconnect and using that shared understanding of the status quo to help to think about the path to improvement, I think is where we would say we're starting with in terms of the broader theory of action.
Excellent. Thank you, David and Vanessa. I see we have another question from Ahmad, and that is there a plan to sample high concentration of people of color outside of Boston?
Sure, good question. This is Karen from EDGE. So the sample of African Americans in the survey was actually about 40% in Suffolk County and the rest distributed across the state. And then looking at the numbers for the Hispanic parents, actually only about a third were in Suffolk County. The rest were distributed outside the state. So even though we did an oversample specifically in Suffolk County, that's not entirely where the people of color in the survey came from. The oversamples for those audiences were statewide.
Great, thank you. We have a question about whether we will send the handouts. The answer is yes. The webinar deck itself is actually posted on a Massachusetts research website that we have as part of the Learning Heroes website, and we will make sure that that direct link is sent out to you all. It was included in the invitation to this webinar, but we will certainly send it again. We also have a 2-page overview of the findings, and we're excited that as of today, we actually have both of those materials, the 2-page overview and this PowerPoint in Spanish as well on the website. So we will make sure you all get that link. We also plan to post the recording of this webinar after the session. Looks like we have another question that just came in. Is One8 going to try to uncover the root cause or root causes of the gap in information?
That's such a great question. I think we would love to. I think we as a team are fairly dubious about our ability to do that as a foundation, and I think that answer will be different across different communities. So it would not surprise me if the answer is, in some cases, there are communication structures between schools and families that just are fundamentally broken in some places, in certain situations. In some places, there are things about the structure of the report card that is, not leading to the best set of shared information. In some places, there are more root cause issues about the level of trust between families and schools. And so that's part of the reason that we've structured this next stage of work around dissemination and then hearing sort of the root cause analysis at the community level, because I do think we probably have done what we can do effectively as a foundation. And now our hope is that the better course of action is to have the data as a conversation starter, but allow for communities to unpack that themselves at the local level, which is just a tough role for philanthropy. That said, if other folks have ideas about root cause analysis that would be helpful, I think we are always curious in ideas, and we are really interested to hear any conclusions that come back from this dissemination work and think about what our role is in helping either to further test those conclusions or hypotheses, and to start to, probably even more importantly, test ways of improving those root cause conditions in a way where we can start to actually drive a better relationship between schools and families, and ultimately stronger achievement for students.
Excellent, thank you. Does anyone have any final questions? You can either raise your hand or you can type it into the question box. Just give 1 minute for that. Okay, I don't see any additional ones. And so we, again, are extremely grateful to Vanessa and the One8 Foundation, the Barr Foundation for their support, for Edge Research for all of their great work on this, our amazing Massachusetts partners, and we're so grateful that you spent 50 minutes of what is a interesting weather afternoon on much of the East Coast, and we just really appreciate your attention, your participation, your interest in this issue. We will follow up with those web links and the resources as we indicated, and we hope this is just the beginning of the conversation. Thank you all so much for being part of this today.